Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Let's just let's start with a quick prayer. And Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for yet another Sunday to give you glory and celebrate your resurrection. Lord, we just ask that you would continue to enlighten us in the ways that we can reach our teens, reach these young souls for you, and help them to understand the grace of your redemption and how you've won a path back to you and the Father. Let's call this as we pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. St. Margaret of York.
Pray for us.
All right. So just want to start off with just a couple minutes of recap from last time, how things went for you and your groups. So session 2, created as gift. We were talking about Genesis, kind of the message of the artist, right, was in there. Any thoughts? Good, bad?
Good.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm. We started opening up more.
Okay.
I felt a little more comfortable sharing in groups, so I thought it went well.
Different activities seem to...
Yeah, we had to really give them the go-ahead, the permission to be really like artistic when they did the acting out of the verse in Genesis. So at first they were like, what? You want us to do what? I'm like, do whatever you want, just like, be a tree if you want to be a tree. You know?
Yeah.
So when they finally got it, they were actually pretty comical.
Cute.
So they had fun with it. So it went well.
Cool.
They liked the questions better too.
They liked the questions?
Yeah, the questions in the first one I felt like were really repetitive, but in the second one they thought that they were, I don't know, it was easier for them to open up to.
Yeah.
I think.
We got into a little bit more new content with the second one. The first one, like you, may have seemed repetitive, but it was good to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and which I can understand, like you said, it can be repetitive for some people, but important
And
to
the
make
number
sure.
of activities was great. You know, there was a lot of activities
Yeah.
going on, and we spaced it out, and it just
Mhm.
gets them up
Yeah.
and up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yeah. So, all right, great. Well, I'm glad to hear that they are settling into like the discussion and the questions a little bit more, because this next session, session 3, is going to rely heavily on discussion, but a lot of it is very scripted and prompted for you. So as far as the questions. Session 3, this is actually really drawing out points that are not actually either in the middle school edition of Theology of the Body or the high school edition. So you'll notice I don't have any copied pages of additional information with this packet from the high school edition, because even the high school edition doesn't touch what we're talking about here, but we're going to talk about the process of redemption versus the process of sin, 7 stages of sin, 7 stages of grace, which actually, and we got a couple ways of making that actually pretty real for the kids, but we don't want to present it in a way that seems like, oh, you just need to memorize these steps kind of thing. That's really not the point of this. The point is to kind of see how sin can work its way into our life, but also to see the way that grace works into our life as well, and kind of doing a compare and contrast there. And it's going to build off of what we began working with in Genesis last time. So, because we took Genesis through creation, of course, right after creation, we have Adam and Eve and the fall, the original sin now. So we talked about those original experiences last time of unity, original nakedness, original solitude, and now we're faced with that reality of original sin, right? That first sin. So just jumping in here on the front page, we got the prayer there at the beginning. The gather activity, TP'd in sin. I'll put a little caveat here. We're not sure yet if we're going to use toilet paper, or last year we ended up using yarn, actually, because we had a whole bunch of it lying around, and rather than going out and buying a ton of toilet paper that was going to then just go to waste, we use yarn, but I have to check and see if we have enough supply, and if not, which route we're going to go. But the same process applies, right? So getting a volunteer from the group, you give them a little bit of either toilet paper, like one roll, or you give them just a little bit of the yarn, and they wrap the person up, and the person tries to break free, and of course they can. And then you give them a lot more, and you wrap them to the point where either you're using a ton of toilet paper, or no, you're fine. Or using a lot more yarn to where it's either difficult or impossible for them to break free. It is okay if they're able to break it. It doesn't completely ruin the point, but it does need to be harder, which it will be. So then that can, the follow-up from that can begin our discussion on sin. So how does being wrapped in toilet paper relate to sin, right? And so you can kind of see where we're going with it in the blue box afterwards. It kind of explains that, if we, commit, venial sin once kind of thing, then it's easy, to break free from that and to be sorry for it. But if we do that repeatedly, we end up in a place where we get stuck. We get stuck in this habit of sin, and we really need help. And the big point of that, especially if they aren't able to get out on their own and they need help getting out on their own, that help we call grace, which is a gift from God. So then, like I said, the explanation is going to revolve around the 7 steps of sin and kind of carrying this story of Genesis forward into the original experience of sin. So, you might break this up however you want. Maybe have 2 volunteers read the first half and the second half. Read through it once, and then on that next page, you kind of see an explanation of how we want to go through bringing them to realizing each of these 7 steps of sin. So there's going to be we're going to break it up, kind of like we did the verse, kind of breaking it down to verses last time and jumping back in. We're kind of doing a similar thing here. So you'll see the verse that relates in italics first. And then we really are going to have questions that we're trying to lead them to the answer, what step of sin this is, and what happened. A little bit of explanation about it, and then we'll have another example that's kind of running through all of these to kind of maybe make it a little bit more concrete for them in their life. And then occasionally through here, we're going to ask them to give an example to kind of make it apply to their life, right? Okay. So step 1 in the 7 steps of sin is bypassing the family structure. So we're talking about the original fall, Genesis 3, which is where the snake comes and to Eve and said, did God really say you shall not eat from any of the trees of the garden? We're going to go through this whole thing. She said, only the tree, knowledge of right and wrong, shall we not eat from it, then we'll die. The snake says, you shall not die, we'll be like gods. So she eats some of it, she gives it to Adam, they realize they're naked, they hide from God, God comes and says, where are you? And he says, you've eaten from the tree from which I forbade you to eat. And then there's a whole, actually what they call the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, right at the end, the first good news about how, talking to the snake, because you have done this, cursed are you among all the animals. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. They will strike at your head while you strike at their heel. This is the first foreshadowing of Jesus in all of Scripture. The first promise of a Savior. that the woman is Mary, and that her offspring is Jesus. And of course, the snake is Satan. So, so that's the big picture. And now we get into pulling out the 7 steps of sin from that big picture. Okay, bypassing the family structure. So we read verse 1 there. There's a little note, all these kind of notes that are in the parenthetical boxes there are just extra information. You may not have time to share all of it. Some of it's extra information for you as well. That's a little optional there. But talking about the name, the Hebrew word for serpent there is the same one that's used for the dragon in Revelation. So we kind of have some bookends to the Bible here in terms of language and imagery. But so we read that passage, and then the opening question is about when did the serpent attack Eve? And so we're leading them to the answer that she was alone. So we want to just ask. They may get it just right off the bat, or there's a couple other follow-up questions there. Think about who wasn't there, and when did he wait? He waited until Eve was alone.
I'm sorry, I hate to stop here, but I want to see what the kids have. Which page
Yes,
is that? I
so
just
you
wanna
have that at the
relate
very
to-
back of your packet. So the last 2 pages of your
Oh, okay.
packet is what the kids have.
This
okay?
is what the, okay.
Yeah, so they will have the reading in front of them.
They will
So
have this in front of them?
They
This
will
portion?
they will have this. in
Oh,
front
they'll
of
have
them.
that, okay.
Yeah.
okay.
So those last 2 pages of the packet are what the kids get when they walk through the door. So it'll have the prayer, it'll have the 7 steps of sin worksheet,
Okay.
and then the homework page, which is the 5 obstacles and 5 paths.
Okay.
Okay. So so they will have the text of Genesis 3 in front
Okay.
of them. And so, they could flip it over. I mean, they may flip it over and start trying to guess when they figure out where you're going with it, which is fine. But you may not even tell them it's the 7 steps of sin that you're working on. You may just be like, we're going to process this story together, and say, hey, when did the serpent approach and attack Eve? And I was like, well, I guess when she was in the garden. Well, who wasn't there? Adam, which meant she was alone, right? So we're trying to lead them to come up with the answers, right? So Adam and Eve were that first family, right? And he waited until that family, waited so he could bypass that family structure that was there, because we were created for a relationship, right? So this speaks to the goodness of a relationship, and that the serpent attacks when we are kind of detached from that a little bit, when we feel isolated. So there is a little bit more of an explanation here. It may be that Adam was only a couple feet away. So we're not trying to necessarily draw a picture that Adam was, way on the other side of the garden working on the watermelons or something. I don't know. But he may have very well been right there. And there's actually, he probably was right there, but he was silent. Which in his silence, he left her isolated. He left her alone, even if he may have physically been right there. So now they're at the top of that next page. He's around, so we're not, alone here isn't so much that physical sense of being alone, but that sense of isolation. Adam was supposed to be protecting Eve. He was the steward of the garden. And now, especially if you understand the idea of the serpent as not just this like timid little garden snake, but as the saint, as the dragon, then why didn't Adam step in as the steward of the garden, right? So there's, even if he was right there, there's still an isolation that happened, that the serpent bypassed. Okay, bypass that family structure to get to that point of isolation. Right. So then we jump into an example right there, right above before we get to step 2. That might make this a little more concrete for them. Your friend asks you to lie to your parents to go to a party instead of a movie. Tell them you're going to a movie, we're just going to go to a party. Your friend, although they are not Satan, good clarifying point for kids. Okay. All right.
Well, no.
Depends on the friend.
Creates a moment within yourself that you feel this sense of isolation. Because on the one hand you feel isolated because am I going to lose this friendship, or am I going to hurt my parents by lying to them? Am I going to so then there's this tension of wanting to be in community but not hurting. I've got relationships in tension with each other, right? Which one do I break? And just by the fact that you have to make that decision, you've already been placed into isolation, into this sense of isolation. Okay? All right. So we're still using that same verse, and we ask another question. After Adam and Eve are alone, what does Satan do next? And they're gonna have those verses right in front of them, and they're gonna be like, well, they may say he tempts them, and you may say, well, how? What did he actually do? Well, he asks a question. And this is important because once we already feel alone, what the question does is it sows doubt. It's an innocent little question, causes us to doubt what we already know to be true, to be good. So the question brings doubt. So jumping back to our example, maybe the question your friend asks is, what's the big deal if you don't tell your mom where you are or where you're going? What she doesn't know isn't going to hurt her, right? Seems like an innocent, small little question. What she doesn't know isn't going to hurt her, right? And that begins to sow the doubt of what I know to be right and wrong, right? I know I shouldn't go to this party, but now there's this innocent little question. Well, maybe it is okay because maybe it won't really, be hurting her. And then so then this is where we're going to jump in with kind of a closing question for this verse. Give an example where you might have experienced a question that caused doubt in you. So this is something we're asking the teens, right? So this is the kind of, those different levels of learning, right? Of selection, recall, and I don't know the education term for when you have to create the story, the example, the essay is the one. I don't know. Whatever that one is, that's what we're doing here. So it's not just recall, it's not just an application. Now they have to come up with the question that has maybe sown doubt. Probably in the context of peer pressure, that a lot of this would maybe happen in their life. Maybe even in the context of bullying or something that sowed a doubt that, hey, maybe I'm not good enough at, maybe somebody said in the context of a sporting event, right? Do you even know how to play basketball? Something like that. That sowed doubt in their life. We want to kind of help draw that out and help them apply that. Okay. Step 3, the lie. Eve responds with what God told her. The snake says, "You certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods, who know good and evil." So Eve answers the question, but Satan responds with what? So the kids might say, just a statement, an explanation, but what was it true? And they're going to stop here because they're not going to be sure whether it's true. This is going to, and we're going to have to challenge them to think about it. It's like, when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods. Is that a lie or truth? The fact is, it is a lie, but it's a very subtle one because they were already like God. We know from creation account that they were created in the image and likeness of God. It's a lie that when they ate of it, they would be like God because they were already like God. They didn't need to eat of the fruit to be like God. So then going back to the example from before, what seems like the innocent question of what she doesn't know won't hurt her, right? Is actually a lie because in doing so we're damaging our relationship of trust. All right, so we really are hurting her, even if nothing were to happen, right? We are still hurting that relationship, so we are hurting. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. Step 4, fear. So now that Satan has said, you certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open. You will be like gods who know good and evil. Right? Just eat it. You're going to be like God. Right? You can see that like peer pressure factor in this. Right? And then, so what are the feelings that, when I ask the kid, what are the feelings you face when you're in a situation of peer pressure, right? And we're looking for fear here because we're afraid that it's true. We're afraid that if we don't, we won't be like God. And not to mention the fact that if it's really a dragon, okay, all right, then there is supposed to be fear. That imagery, again, figurative language to convey ultimate reality, right, of fear in the face of sin. So that fear was that they wouldn't be like God, which caused them to question their worth, caused them to question their self-worth, what God has, the value He had placed on them, right? So this, in the parentheses here, is an activity you can do to kind of help demonstrate that worth and value there. Talk about taking 5, 10, 20, whatever dollar bill out, a nice, clean, crisp one preferably, asking them, would you like this, right? It's like, and they all say yes, ask them why. It's like, well, it's $20, that's awesome. What can you do with $20, right, or whatever, all right? And you crumple it up and say, you still want it? Yeah, it's still $20, right? Throw it on the floor, stomp on it a couple times, have them stomp on it a couple times, hold it back up and say, do you still want it? It's like, well, yeah. I mean, I don't understand why you did that, but yeah, it's still, it's still $20. I can still get, whatever. I don't know. What do kids buy with $20 these days? And then we put it back in our pocket and quickly tell them about how worthless we may feel sometimes. It doesn't change our true value. No matter how much we get stomped on or how much we put ourselves down, how much we think we're worthless, we still have that value, even if we're all crumpled up and stomped on and dirty and been run through the washing machine and whatever, we still have that value. And that value comes from how we were created, and it is never lost in the eyes of Jesus, which is why He came back to redeem us through the cross, is so that we also could have the reward of what our value is worth, right? To show us what we were worth, even when we had forgotten. And that's when you can pull out the second bill that is also now still clean and crisp, right? That's what Jesus did for us. He never lost sight of the fact that we were eternally valuable. But he knew we needed to be cleaned, right? So he came back to do that for us. Okay. Bringing it back and applying it to them. Why would you listen to the friend who tempts you to lie to your parents? Because you're afraid of losing that friend, losing that friendship, not looking cool. You're afraid of something, right? All right. The choice and the act, right? The woman saw that the tree was good for food, so she took it, ate it, and also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Okay. Which is why the kids may challenge you on the fact that she was alone, is because they will have read this where it says, who was with her. I'm sorry, my mind is circling back to step 1 here. So they might say, well, she really wasn't alone. It says he was with her, and you're like, you're right. But what kind of loneliness then are we talking about? And that's when you can talk about the difference between being physically alone and feeling isolated. All right. If they jump on that. I don't know if they will or not. Okay. So once fear has entered in, it leads us to what? It leads us to make a choice, to act on that choice. And in this case, that choice is sin, right? And we conform ourselves to the evil we have chosen, right there. What does that mean? By believing the lie, we have rejected the truth. We've rejected that truth that we are created in the image and likeness of God. Right? We conform ourselves to the lie rather than to the truth. And it becomes easier to believe that lie at that point, right? So, like, if we get into the habit, then that's where that example comes in. If we get in the habit of lying to our parents, it becomes a lot easier to do that because we believe that it's okay. We've conformed ourselves to the sin that it's okay to lie to my parents, right? Rather than the truth of the fact that my parents want what's best for me, and the reason that those rules are in place is because they're looking out for me and for my good, right? Okay. So then helping them process this even deeper, asking them the question, can each of you think of a bad habit you do now that you never used to do, right? And if you have an example you want to share with them, then that would probably kind of help get the conversation started as well. So, questions so far? Okay. There's a note in here about what happens after they've eaten the fruit. Their eyes are open, they realize they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves, right? So last time we talked about naked without shame. Now after sin, they are naked with shame, right? And clarifying what this means, right? Because it can be confusing to kids, particularly in our culture, which says you don't need to be ashamed of anything, right? Let's be honest. That's what pop culture is screaming at our kids. Just do whatever you want, and who cares if it's right or wrong, right? Does it feel good? All right. So that there is no shame. So if we only ever understand shame as a negative, then that message from culture starts to sound pretty good, right? But that's not the way John Paul II understood shame. And he points back to this reality, right? That it wasn't so much that they were ashamed of their bodies as they were ashamed of their concupiscence. Okay, big word for tendency towards sin, right? That now, after the original sin, we now have, and we all inherit because of that, a state of concupiscence, a tendency towards sin. Not sin itself doesn't cause sin, we still have to make that choice. But we have this tendency, this openness towards sin that was not there from creation. All right? So that was what they were ashamed of, because before they could see each other naked and not fear using each other or being reduced to what you could be for me, or reduced to your body parts, or reduced to pleasure, right? Now they saw each other and they felt those things and they were ashamed of that. And then John Paul II says that's why they hid themselves. Which points to a positive point of shame, is that shame isn't just being ashamed that I did something wrong, but shame also helps us protect what is being threatened. So shame is protecting them. It was because of shame, because they did something wrong, that this shame entered in their life. But shame also allowed them the wisdom to clothe themselves, to protect themselves from being from using each other, right? So in here, this is kind of a first look at why modesty is important, right? As helping protect the gift, right? Does that make sense? And why actually it's really important for our kids to understand in a culture that screams relativism at them, that if they equate shame with guilt rather than with helping me protect myself from being used from the wrong, then that message is going to sound really good. But at its base, it is empty. It's an empty message. Okay? Yeah.
When God told Adam and Eve not to eat of the forbidden tree,
Mm-hmm.
He never said, if you do, there's going to be these consequences. Did he infer that their lives would change?
He did say that, place you in the garden, and you may eat of all the fruit of all the trees except for the tree in the middle of the garden.
Yeah, but he didn't say if you did eat of this tree that your life won't be the same anymore, basically, which is what happened.
Well, let me pull the text. I think he did say that they would
I
die.
can't remember. Oh, he did.
Which,
What do you think that meant to them?
right, yeah, because the death they died there was a spiritual, like you said, was a spiritual death. We'll never know, but to a lot of people who guess that we still would have had a sort of physical death even before sin, but that it wouldn't have been associated with pain and all the pain and the sorrow that comes with it. It would have been more of like what we believe about Mary and her assumption. In the Orthodox Church, they don't call it the Feast of the Assumption, they call it the Feast of the Dormition, of Mary's going to sleep. And that there's a tradition within the church that like if that first sin hadn't happened, that is what death would have been like for all of us.
Well, essentially, there would be no suffering.
That there would be no
No
suffering.
suffering.
Yeah. That and that quote unquote death would have just been a moving from this world to the next, plain and simple, without all the suffering, without even technically without even the separation of our body and soul, which we were created as a composite, right? That our body, in a way, our body at death, our soul and our body are separate. That's how we define death now, right? And our body continues to bear out the suffering that was entered into this world with sin, right? That is the decay that our body continues to face even after our soul has left our body, right? That even that wasn't a part of the original plan for creation. I don't know if that answers your question.
Where I'm leading is, we're dealing with 13 and 14-year-old kids here,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just probably entering the realm of temptation.
Yeah.
That's more serious than what they've been tempted with before, up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're going to be facing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And depending on what they know of their parents, if they've been disciplined in the past for what they've done, things like that, they're going to pay closer attention probably to trying to get away with something, and with the fear that their parents may find out. So I just think I don't know how real this is going to feel to them. I don't know if they're going to be relating the story of Adam and Eve. If
Right.
somebody's asking them to smoke a joint or something,
Right.
drink a beer, or
Yeah.
something like that. So I think it's very relative because it's where
Yeah.
it all started.
Mhm.
I would be more inclined to really talk to them about real life.
Yeah. Well, maybe one way of doing that would to be maybe paint a fuller picture of this example that we're running through here. Paint a picture of what, this friend, what party he's talking about, and there's going to be drinking, that there's may even be drugs there, right? That there's a whole bunch of people who are going to be there that have values that you don't agree with, right? Flesh out that picture. That may be one way to make this
Well,
more real.
what I've started with them already is I volunteer at the JDC at Warren County.
Okay.
And I tell them, I see kids there every time they're your age,
Yeah.
believe it or not. And they would rather have fun doing the wrong stuff than doing something good. Because, they tried it, they got away with it, and keep taking a step further, just a step further,
Yeah.
until they get caught. And then mom and dad can't protect them or whatever.
Yeah.
And the legal system comes down on them
Right.
and throws them in there.
Yeah.
It's a real awakening.
Yeah.
And it can happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I see these kids in here, they look like little angels. So,
Right.
but I think they're bringing it out in here is if you begin to lie or you try to deceive,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems easy, then you take the next step.
Right.
You keep marching.
Which is, ties us back to that beginning game, right? Of, it's easy to get out of it, all right, to not get caught. You could say that getting out of the toilet paper or the yarn or whatever is the not getting caught, right, in it. But it was like, well, I'll push it a little farther, I can take a couple more wraps of toilet paper, or I can push that line a little farther, right?
Yeah.
Until eventually I can't get back out of
Yeah.
it.
Well, I want to blend the spiritual with the reality.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what they're asking us to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
last week, we talked all about the metaphorical speak and what that means, and in actuality, that's what Genesis is, not only to the ancient
Right.
Jews trying to, relate how the creation of earth came about to them in their time, but even to us in our time. So, we read about, you're right, Adam and Eve, and this is very metaphorical speak, and it's not in real life. But you can apply that same situation to going out and smoking a joint, or, let's just, take this sexual encounter just a little bit further than what you're used to, and
Right.
let's try all these things, and oh, it's not gonna hurt you, and it's not that bad. And so I think that's exactly what they want us to do, is to take this, story of Adam and Eve, explain to them the metaphorical side of this and how it relates to real life.
Yeah,
I mean, at least that's what I'm tying into what we were doing last week compared to how we're progressing and going through all this.
yeah, definitely. So, definitely, I want you to make it real to them. How you do that for each of your groups is up to you, because you know your kids better than I do, right? And it sounds like you kind of started doing that already through your experience, right, and drawing on some of that. Definitely do that. Draw on your experience, but the metaphor, the figurative language still speaks, like you said, to our reality now. We need to help them draw that out. So,
But I agree, that's our challenge, to help them understand how
Right.
Adam and Eve does relate to us now.
yeah,
Because, right, if you just read that story of Adam and Eve, I mean, you can read that story 1,000 times and not pick up on the realities of what it means. But if we can pull out those specific real-life examples and relate that back to how Adam and Eve, just the same way as your parents are telling you things, or laws are telling you what's appropriate and what's not, God was telling Adam and Eve what was appropriate and what was not, without even going into what are all the full ramifications. Like you said, you will die. And the devil says, oh, you won't die. God knows if you eat this other night, he's not going to kill you. I mean, it's very much like the, little devil and angel sitting on your shoulder, right?
right.
But it goes back to what Matt said early on, it damages the relationship. That's
Same
what
with the
happens.
parents.
Yeah.
And the kids
So-
that you're working with have probably damaged relationships.
If you
Not
want,
everybody. Not
Right.
everybody, but most of them. It's generally a character.
So relationship is important.
right, yeah, I mean, and that's the reason. The reason the tree is. Did anyone ask that last week? Did anyone ask why the tree is there anyway?
We kind of talked about it.
Because if it didn't come up last week, it might come up
Yeah,
this
but-
week.
No.
About the whole free will question, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of, we went into it, I don't remember who answered or how we went into it, but we did talk about it.
Right. Free will for what? Why did we need free will?
Because it, yeah.
You can't love without free will. You can't love without.
We can't love without free will.
Well, it's not as
Okay,
meaningful.
but love is rooted in a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? So bringing it back there, we all we're made for community. We're made for these relationships, and we all are wounded in our relationships. Some to much greater extent than others, right? But we've all seen wounded relationships, even if we haven't experienced much of it ourselves. And you can probably draw on the stories of kids you've worked with at JDC about, all right, so maybe, bypassing the family structure simply meant somebody stopped a kid on his way home from school and said, hey, do you want to try this, right? One little puff on this won't hurt, right? Right, that's the innocent little question, right? And like, oh, if you want to, can you take it, can you take these drugs and deliver them to so and so? You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything wrong. It's not hurting anybody, right? There's the lie, right? Now the lie, the fact that you're involved isn't going to hurt you, right? All right, and now you're carrying. All of a sudden, maybe I'm elaborating on a story that you probably have much more context for.
Yeah,
But-
that's fine.
So
I think too.
Take it down that road.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you're asking too, that a lot of these kids don't understand what the choice is, the consequence is. If you do this is what'll happen. If you do that, this is what'll happen. And they don't really see the full picture of what the consequences are for some of these choices they're making.
Well, and as important, I think the parents have to really be strong in their discipline.
Mm-hmm.
But-
You know, if kids are used to getting away with little stuff, and they will work it. And you even know that they got caught smoking marijuana, and they have this big sob story. And it wasn't really me. All this kind of stuff.
we're gonna get to that. That's step
You buy into
7.
that.
That's step
Buy into
7.
it.
That's blame. Which is step 7. Yeah. So, you know, and there's part of us that we should definitely help kids understand consequences to their actions. So I don't want what I'm about to say to seem like I'm minimizing that, because kids do need to understand consequences. But to your point of, did Adam and Eve understand that all of this was going to happen? Well, of course not. There was no way for them to understand the consequence that
Yeah.
they were going to have on all of history,
That
all
was their only
humanity.
chance.
Right.
They didn't get a second chance.
But, you know, as best as we try to explain consequences of our actions to our kids, none of us ever understands fully the consequences of our actions,
Right.
good or bad.
And they have to make
Because-
mistakes, that's how they learn.
Yeah, well, and they make mistakes. That's how they work. But we will never understand the full consequences of what we do. What do I mean? The whole idea of on the good side. So I'm going to use a positive example here, right? Of pay it forward, right? All right. The first person who starts that chain has no idea who they've affected on the long run, right? Something you say today may make a huge difference in a choice that person makes, which may make a difference in how they live out their family life, which may determine what kind of future their kids have, which may even in the end determine whether a soul comes into this world. Like, we never understand the consequences of our actions. Should we try to understand them as best we can? Yes. But when the consequence was death, right? Again, this is figurative, right? But and we're putting almost probably too much literalism on it. But if the consequence is death, what more do we need to know, right? At that point, what more do they need to know?
And here's the thing too, they talked about this in the Bible study for the Bible timeline. Jeff Stevens talked about it. He said that God there might have been different consequences if Adam and Eve hadn't have run away and hid and blamed each other, if they would have instead come right to God and said, oh my gosh, we ate from the tree of life, the devil tempted us and we just did it and we're so sorry, but they didn't. They hid,
Yes.
and then they blamed each other, like Adam said, well,
Yeah.
she made me eat it.
Yeah.
Well, then he was really angry because, well,
Yeah.
okay, you're not even coming to me to tell me that you
No,
made the
that's-
mistake, like
Yeah.
your kids' lives.
Well, that would be a good point for the kids.
Right.
Because when they
Yeah,
come to you
so
and
it's
tell you
it's
the
actually
truth,
it's kind of in here. So let's get to that because I know we're starting to run low on time. We got a good bit to get through here. So step 6 is the hiding, right? So after they've made the fig leaves to cover themselves, they hear the Lord coming like He usually does in the breezy part of the day, and they hide, right? And God asks. Oh well, we'll get to that here in a minute. So what did they do? They went and they hid. Why did they hide themselves? They knew that they had conformed themselves to the lie, right? So they're hiding from the truth. The one who had given them the gift of the whole garden, right? And there was just this one stipulation, right? And we refused that gift in favor of the one thing the Lord had asked us not to partake of, right? The example, when we do something wrong, we want to hide, right? When that kid comes home from the party, when he told his mom he'd been at the movie, do you think he's going to go and just hang out in the kitchen with his mom? No, he's going to go to his room and try to avoid contact with his mom unless she asks, how was the movie, right? And I have to lie again, right? Or confess, or whatever, right? So that'll relate, all right? And then there's that part in here to your point about the point that Jeff Cavins makes about God asking, where are you, right? Sometimes this is seen as God didn't know where Adam and Eve were because they were hiding, which is just silly, right? God created all of that. He knew where they were, but this was his first showing to Adam and Eve, but really showing us, again, metaphor, right? That he's opening the door, he's inviting us back. As soon as we've messed up, he's inviting us back, right? And it may have been different if they had taken him up on that invitation rather than hiding, right? Okay, so what do then? They blame each other. This is pretty, pretty typical from our lived experience, right? We try to make excuses for why things went wrong, right? Because we don't want it to hurt the relationship we already have, and we don't want to take responsibility for that because that would hurt the relationship. When in fact the relationship has already been hurt by our action, right? So when we eventually get caught for deceiving our mom, punished, our first instinct is to say, you never let me do anything, you always say no, you don't trust me, right? When in fact it was us who broke the trust. It was us who didn't come and ask, can I go to this? It was, which side did that really start on, right? Okay. How often do you find yourself blaming others? Can you think of anyone else who blames others, right? We are in election season. It's not, you don't have to look very far for people to be passing out blame on somebody else, right? All right, on one side or the other, all right? So be so glad when we get past Tuesday because then commercials will not be just political anymore. All right, application. All right, so we want to, again, try and help make this a little bit more relevant to them. There's 2 clips that are going to be on the DVD, and I had to change out the links, but the links that are on here work because the original links were to videos that are no longer on YouTube. Are you all familiar with Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe? Okay, it's written as Christian allegory to begin with. And so they will have this worksheet that's on the next page. We're going to watch the 2 clips. The first clip is when Edmund, the first time he comes into Narnia, after Lucy's already in there, he comes in through the wardrobe and then he meets the White Witch, right? So it's going to go through that scene. And then the second one is when, I should back up. Part of that first scene, right? She finds out he's one of 4, which is part of the prophecy. She wants him to go and get the other siblings and then bring them to her, right? And without going into detail, you'll see several different examples of how each of the 7 steps are in here. So bypass the family structure. Edmund was alone when he met the White Witch, right? The innocent little question, you could even be king, right? I could even see you being king. He's already destined to be the king of Narnia. That's who he is. And she lies and said, oh, you could be king, right? And that's part of that question. There's going to be several different answers they could give to each of these. All right. The second clip is when he goes to the castle alone. She gets upset, right? He blames. How does it work? I tried to get them here, and I brought them this far. Isn't that good enough? He's hiding from the rest of his family when he sneaks out from the beaver's house. All right. So just a chance to kind of make that again a little bit more concrete. All right. Sorry that we're rushing through this here. So on the flip side of it is the 7 steps of grace, right? And I want to draw your attention to right before the student pages. You'll see this here. I didn't have another. Like I said at the beginning, this isn't covered in the high school edition, so there's no reference pages. But this is 7 steps of sin, 7 steps of grace, kind of laid out side by side, if that kind of helps you with the understanding a little bit more. There's a little bit more detail there, but it's basically the same thing that we're talking about. The 7 steps of grace we see not in Genesis, but in Mary, in the Annunciation. All right. So God sends His angel into the family relationship. It wasn't until after Mary was betrothed to Joseph that then there's the Annunciation. All right. Instead of asking a question, the angel proclaims the truth. Right. Which instead of sowing doubt, sows joy, right? Joy for the truth that is coming, right? The angel responded with the truth of what was going to happen, not a lie. Instead of fear, we have trust. We trust in the gift that was being given. Instead of a choice and act that led to sin, we have, which was a no to God's plan, we have Mary saying yes. Mary's fiat, her yes to the truth, rather than her no to the truth, rather than a no to the truth, which is what sin is. All right, instead of hiding, now we have Mary going out in charity to her cousin Elizabeth. All right, instead of blame, now we have praise. Right, and so that's turned back to God. All right, does that make sense? I know that's very quick here. I just want to be mindful of your time. All right. Last year, I will admit, last year it was hard for our leaders to get through all of this. Okay. So this next piece is kind of put in there. If you don't get it in there this time, you could probably work this in at a different point. This idea of 3 reactions, 3 ways we respond to sin in our life. All right, and that's what this graphic on the next page talks about. So a lot of this is more for your information, but that the 3 reactions are indulgence. Oh, I'm gonna sin anyway. I'm just gonna do it, right? Okay. Not the church's position. All right. It's like I can't overcome this temptation. I might as well just give in. All right. That's the indulgence. All right. That's on one end of the spectrum. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum is this idea of repression. Right. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. All right. Constantly telling people, just don't do it. All right. Which there are a lot of people who go that way, but a lot of times it still leads to us doing it because guess what we're thinking about all the time? What we're not supposed to be doing. All right. Christ's way is a middle way, as it always is, right? And that's the church's way. This is the middle way of redemption, right? Of a purifying of our desires. That comes from receiving the gift of His grace, rather than trying to take or to earn my way to perfection, to salvation, to whatever, right? That I actually need to receive. That I can't do this on my own, but that Christ's life and His grace in me can make this happen. All right. So like I said, if you don't get to that this time, then that's fine. But we do need to draw out the point that that help that we need comes from Christ on the cross, which is what the last video is going to be about. It's Third Day's song, Love Song, set to a whole bunch of imagery about Calvary and the cross. And it's a good time to just have them reflect on what Christ did for us to open that pathway back up. All right, and then you can just kind of close that with just a simple prayer. Maybe a glory be or something. And that'd be it. Okay. The next page, the 5 obstacles, is their homework to take with them. This is again trying to help them make it relevant and applicable to their life. what are 5 things or experiences or situations that stand in the way of people or specifically teens to our redemption, right? And what are, so mirroring this, this 7 steps of sin versus 7 steps of grace. So what would be 5 paths of redemption through that, right? In those situations. Okay? Any questions?
Quick question on this homework. On some of the old emails from Denise, some of them said we should collect it, some of them said we should just do an X-Bite if they have it, and then they can just take it back home with them.
Yes.
What
So
do you exactly
we're
mean?
we're just, we need to make sure that they've done it and
Right.
bring it with them.
You don't
And
necessarily need it.
no,
Okay.
I don't need it. The only time we're collecting it is if it's makeup homework, if it's makeup work. For a kid who couldn't make it to a session, then we are asking them to turn it into Denise. But its primary purpose is to help serve as kind of, again, solidifying what's been learned, and then maybe as a discussion starter for you at the beginning of class, a way to check in with them, and to kind of make that bridge, build that bridge from one lesson to the next. All right?
I'm sorry, I may have messed up. These 2 sheets were the 7 steps of sin versus the 7 steps of grace.
Yes.
Obviously, there's one area where we talk about the 7 steps of grace. Do kids get copies of these? Or is that is not in there?
That is, I wasn't currently planning on putting that in there
I
for
mean,
them.
would it make sense to make copies? Because to me, this is a good reference thing for them to have.
Yeah, I can, that actually, to be honest, that's something I found today. So I
Okay.
hadn't really, because,
Because we can talk about all this stuff through there, but my guess is they're not gonna retain all that information.
Okay.
And even if they get a hard copy, they're probably, and they may or may not look at it anyway, but it's
Yeah.
something that they can at least take with them to compare,
right,
okay, sin versus
I-
grace. And
I'll
what was
include it
we
in their
talked about?
handout as instead, in replace of the additional reading kind of thing, for them. Yeah, I hadn't thought that far with it. It was, I wanted to give a little more information for you all as a facilitator, so I was looking for something. It's, just so you know, it's the 7 steps of sin versus 7 steps of grace. It's based off of some work by, Father Brian, Bransfield, in his work, The Human Person According to John Paul II. So he kind of fleshed out these ideas that John Paul II introduced in his theology of the body.
And those clips, they will actually be on the disc.
Yes,
Right, okay.
the clips will be on the disc. If you, like I said, I updated the YouTube links that are in here, so you can follow those and watch them online. That second one is long, but you really only need the first 4.5 minutes of it. I put a note in there about that. Or if you're sure that you will bring a DVD with you, you can take one now. Otherwise, we'll have them waiting for you in the room. Okay? It is okay to take one as long as you promise to bring it with you on Sunday, because I won't have any other way of equipping your class with them, with those clips. Okay? All right.